Hello, Kansas and Western fans. It's time for episode 38 of the construction of the Kansas and Western HO scale model railroad. The last 2 weeks I was tasked with working on Holcomb Power Plant, and we'll get to that. But as you can see right off the bat, there's a major change that took place over the whole weekend, and that was to add backdrop material for all the remaining areas that I hadn't had it up yet. And obviously it still needs paint. Eventually they'll all get commercial backdrops. But for now, I really liked having at least the blue wall behind everything. It made the operations videos look a little bit better at least. And I don't know how long it's going to take me to get all the commercial backdrops, first of all, chosen, but also ordered and paid for, most importantly. So that's what you see there. This window here above Union Tank Car hasn't been installed yet because I still have to figure out how to install it and still make this module removable. So that's why it's just kind of leaning in place there. I decided to go ahead and block most of the window because I really like the consistency of the heights all the way around the room. And I really couldn't come up with a good reason not to block it as much as I was going to. I was thinking about doing just a 12-inch backdrop in this area, and it really didn't gain me anything except a little more daylight, and I'm not really sure how important that was. So I really like the consistency over everything else. Anyway, moving on, we'll do a full tour of the layout, and then we'll stop at Holcomb Power Plant to talk about what I worked on there. There are a couple random things here that I also added. And here in the Royal Gorge route, I still have to finish, obviously, scenery. This is primarily what it needs to be done. Lots of trees need to be added. I have to blend in this backdrop with trees and brush just to kind of hide the seam between the backdrop and the 3D portion. And still have to finish ballast here. Still have to do all the rock work along the river, figure out what I'm going to do with this road, and so on. And then I think I failed to talk about this last time. This is that concrete bridge that scenic riders of the Royal Gorge Railroad see when they pass. It's on the west side of the gorge, I believe. And this is a concrete bridge that was made strictly for water runoff. You can obviously see how steep the rock face is, and it's much more steep in other areas, but I think this is a particular cut where a lot of water runoff comes down, and then rather than having to tunnel under the tracks or build some other kind of culvert system, they decided just to build a bridge. So that's kind of a unique feature I don't think I've ever seen anywhere else, and I think it's something that I can manage to scratch build myself, and I think I'm going to place it right here in this corner. But that's something that I wanted to point out that I had the idea to go ahead and model in my layout. All right, moving on down the main line to Canon City. I still have to figure out what all I'm going to do with Colorado quarries here. Not too much structure-wise, except for maybe an office building. Might do a flat up against the wall, but definitely some aggregate piles. I guess they specialize in landscaping rocks shipped all over the place, so quite a variety of aggregate piles might be kind of neat to see there. Then we move into Canon City proper. Station needs parking lots added, a little bit more fencing, and the downtown area needs several more structures. Structures I don't have, I still have to choose what I want to buy, and if this wins the poll at some point, I'll probably make that decision and start working on those. But I do have the layout kind of figured out. You can kind of see how I have the highway drawn out here just to give me an idea of what I want to try to accomplish. And we'll move down to Portland cement. Most of the structures are in place now. Just have to get them painted properly, details added, and so on. I'm probably going to do some construction vehicle staging here in this area just to kind of do something with this space. Maybe some aggregate piles of some kind. I'm not sure about that. And then obviously all the trackage needs to be painted and ballast added in this whole area. And then these portals need to be hidden at some point with scenery of some kind. Still have these car kits that I could work on if you guys want me to see attempt something like that, especially these metal kits. I've never tried anything like that. I have no idea how well that's going to go, but they sure look really nice in other people's layouts when I've seen them done. This is what a few of the examples look like finished. All right, moving around the layout over to Pueblo. Have the track layout figured out here. Just have to spend the time to actually get it installed and working. And then I have to figure out a little bit more what I'm going to do with this structure here. What I'm trying to recreate is this element of the steel plant. You can see all that piping. Not sure how much of that major piping I'm going to do, but there's several cranes, traveling cranes in this area, so I'm going to add one or two more of those kits that will run the entirety of those spurs there. So you got several unloading tracks, and just have to add some kind of structure around it to make it look like something. The backdrop itself is going to be a steel plant from one end to the other, so that'll help to sell the scene on a large steel plant. Moving around to La Junta Yard, still have to add this scenic divider here that kind of separates the yard and Pueblo. And I'll add another structure back there I just came up with to kind of also continue to separate the scene. This first track here next to the curved track is a switch lead for the plant, but this next one is going to help with operations. It's going to be a finished products track. So at the beginning of an operations session, I'll have several loaded gondolas here with finished products. This company actually produces rail as one of its products, and I think they also do maybe some I-beams. I can't think of the reinforcing bar right now, but stuff like that. So that'd be some interesting things that I could stage ready for operations movements. I'll move down to La Junta. Primarily just track work here, painting and ballasting. Still have to do a lot of filler ties. You can see a lot of gaps there. Still have to do that. And still have to finish this loading dock. I added temporarily whistle stop bottles ramp that he sent me for a review. It looks kind of nice. It's a little bit different than this just plain Rick's Products ramp. So I might leave it there. I'm not sure. And I still have to add one more segment to this highway bridge. I do have a kit for that. I just have to put it in place. And then sometime I have to tackle this trestle bridge that will go over King Arroyo here on the east end of the yard. And then that segues over here into Lamar. I'll probably make this a heavy wooded area to kind of help separate the scene. And this station needs a parking lot, some more of that fencing. And then we transition into the rest of Lamar where there's several industries that are all fairly close together. Just have to finish trackage. I think I have an idea in mind for a backdrop, a commercial backdrop. We'll just have to get it ordered so we can fill out this scene. Shouldn't take too much though. It's a pretty small scene. But a lot going on. We'll wrap around to Holly. Structure-wise, I still need to order, excuse me, another one of these kits that I'm going to modify quite a bit to fit around this space so that I can make the scene look like the prototype in that respect to some degree. But otherwise, structure-wise, I think that's about it. Still have to add a lot of details to the co-op office, to the main elevator itself. Still have to finish. I'm calling this a seed distributor. And may yet add another structure here in the foreground, right where that photo's sitting. Haven't decided yet. And obviously finish painting that one and adding details. But the background's in place. The track has started. The weathering process. Just need to add ballast and then ground covering. And fascia for sure, obviously. All right, now Holcomb, here we go. All right, so that looks quite a bit different. The layout I finally decided on, and a lot of these industries, if you've been following me for a while, I delayed laying the track thinking I had to do so because I wanted to build the industry first. But what I forgot in a lot of those cases, including this one, was there's only so many places for that track to go. And for it to become workable for operations, make sense for the layout, a lot of those situations had to resolve themselves by just laying the track first. And the issue I was struggling with this plant kit was this distribution house. The way it's laid out on the kit is this foreground conveyor and the background conveyor are in line with each other. And I was struggling to make that work with my track because I wanted to have the unloading bay really close to one of the ends, of the track, the lead track. So sometimes it's difficult for me to think outside the box, but I encourage everybody to do it sometimes when they're working on their layout. I just had to basically notch the end of that conveyor so it would turn just slightly. You can see it's not off center by a whole lot, maybe 7 or 8, maybe 10 degrees. And that resolved my solution or my issue. But anyway, once I figured that out, I was able to go ahead and start doing base scenery. So you can see it here. And I made a video on this that I plan to release next week on how I filled this gap between this square end, if you'll remember, of the bench work and the round corner here for the top of the helix. So you'll get to see how I filled that, and you can comment on that to see if that was a horrible idea or if it's a well-known idea. We'll find out. But that looks a lot better. Obviously, I left a gap back here because if you can see, there's kind of a rise from left to right. And I do have a commercial backdrop on order that will stretch from that line on the wall you see there, which is electrical conduit, all the way behind Garden City to the corner there. So once that arrives, I'll get that installed regardless of the poll results because it's a backdrop and it looks cool. And I can't wait for you guys to see what I chose. So I hope it turns out like I envisioned. But once that gets up, then I can go ahead and seal up that crack in the back just to make sure it's all good to go. Anyway, the trees here are temporary. You can just kind of see how I've got them set up. This is going to be a wooded area to help separate the scenes between the power plant and Garden City. Obviously, you have to add ground covering. Still need to paint the track, although I do have the base coat on the main line here. Weathering I've started on the other side. And let's just go through all the notes so I don't forget them all. And I've already bypassed, oh no, I haven't bypassed any. They're coming up yet. All right, for the notes here. So if you remember on the main line here, on my helix tracks on every level, I was running power feeders every 180 degrees just to ensure consistent power across the whole main line. Well, I didn't really know how to hide those, and it wasn't really going to be that easy to drill new ones straight down like I've done everywhere else. So I decided just to remove them in general. And I ran a test train and it didn't even notice. So that turned out to be just fine as far as I can tell so far. So just got to remove the feeders. And we'll just run around the side here. So you can see where I've got some of the paint work done. I got a little careless with some of my plastering there, so I have to repaint that. Not a big deal. But you can just kind of see how I blended all this into a hillside using cardboard strips and plaster gauze. And it worked really fine. Now, the other thing that I decided to add was a bridge, because I didn't want to have this power plant island surrounded by a sheer drop-off cliff and railroad tracks with no access. So I'm going to put a bridge here that just goes off layout and then angles down to the ground level there so employees of the power plant can access the plant. So I have considered that. Down here, you can see where I have developed kind of a portal where my helix top kind of ends. And I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to do this yet. I've got some trees kind of standing in place. Essentially, I don't want people to be able to see where the train comes from because this is ugly. It's not prototypical at all. It's just not great. So, but we can't avoid that, right? Sometimes in our layouts, you just have to overcome situations like that. And that's what I'm going to do. So somehow I'm going to hide this portal from view, probably wrap trees really thickly around the outer edge, almost creating a wall that looks hopefully realistic to some degree, and then end somewhere in this point. So you still have unobstructed view of the rest of the scene, but your eye is not going to want to turn towards that to see what kind of a mess that looks like. And then that hillside in the back, that cut, whatever, I'm still going to blend that in. This is just a first coat basically of the plaster gauze being put into place, hardened and painted, but I'm going to add more to that. I just wanted to get this scene figured out before I went to too much more trouble there. Anyway, moving on to other notes. So the trackage here is all placed. It isn't powered yet, and I've actually debated about whether or not I should power it. Because if you can see the locomotives, the way the operation is going to work is a train will come west out of Colorado, up the helix. It will pull onto that siding that you can see there, and then the arriving train will unload itself. by taking turns on these spurs with loaded cars. So the locomotives never really need to pass all the way down to the ends of the spurs. Although now that I'm talking about it, I just remembered that you can see how far the locomotives have to come to drop that train off, and you can't really see, I guess. Maybe if I can just move things here a little bit. You can see the turnout, and it does pass that turnout frog, so I am going to have to power that. So anyway, I remembered that I did figure that out, so sorry for the backtracking on that. Anyway, so one interesting thing is you see the spurs here totally full of cars, and this is not planned at all. I didn't figure this out until I just tried it, but you can see where the siding starts here, and then it wraps around the end of the layout to Charleston. Those 2 locomotives and those 12 cars fit perfectly on that siding. So another happy accident for the Kansas and Western Railroad. For operations, all I have to do is build a train there, and I know it will fit on the spurs down there. All right, moving on. Another note that I have, and that one is just for the structure, getting final paint job and positioned. I'm going to put one of these Walther substation kits here, and all I managed to get done was that primary transformer in the center. So I have that to still work on. There's lots more details that I still have to add for the structures itself, although I think the conveyor system is pretty well done. I am going to add some lights. There's a couple windows on that unit, so the roof has not been glued, so I can add some lights to that later, but a lot more details to add there. And maybe some other, I do have to put a road in. If I'm going to put a bridge, I have to put a road in and probably a parking lot, but we'll see what else I could come up with in here. And then back against that wall, that's where the primary coal pile is going to be, and you can see the discharger there. So I have to come up with some way to support a aggregate pile that won't be that tall all the way to the top of that spout, but probably 50% of the way, I would say, because I don't want to cover that conveyor entry point down underground where the conveyor picks up underneath the pile to transfer to the house and then transfer to the power plant. But that'll all get put into place after I get the backdrop in place. And this end, from you can see that crack in the wall there to the end, is one more sheet of backdrop material that I got installed. This is the only one that got painted because I was tasked to work on with the Hulken Power Plant. However, I do plan to work on painting all the rest of them this weekend while you guys are voting for this weekend's poll. Anyway, you can see here, moving on into Garden City, a collection of those whistle stop models tanks that I reviewed. This is an idea that I came up with for John, and apparently he's made some further sales. So if you guys saw my video or see any of my review videos, let him know, just so he knows how effective him sending me equipment to review is for him, for his business. But I really like the look of these. That's the only one that's painted so far. I do plan to paint the rest of them, but they look really nice. A lot of detail for a simple tank. All right, moving on. Back around the corner of Charleston. Oh, and I should mention that I still have to buy some structure kits for offices and other facilities for both of these industries here. Down here for Charleston, I still need to buy a house kit and build another co-op office, which I believe I already have. If not, I can get one of those. And then I plan to add a dirt road, as is in the prototype, pretty close to the gardens, the elevator. A lot more details and paintwork to add to this, and obviously a backdrop to add. Now in this transition area, I think we're going to add a pond with resin, just because I've always wanted to try that. Nothing too major, nothing too huge, but just to add a little bit more flavor to this corner. And we'll wrap around here to Wichita Industrial Park. Here's that Whistle Stop Models forklift and that storage rack for tanks. Thought this was a good location for those. Obviously need to get some lumber for the lumber yard and add some fencing around here. Weather and paint the track, add ballast. And you've got all metal recycling back here. Still have some more kits that I'd like to buy to add to this mess that you see here with all these transfer conveyors and crushers and cutters and everything. We'll try to represent some more of that here in the foreground. And paint the backdrop. And we move over to Clean Harbors. I have the labels now so I can just look at them. More structures to build here. I have kits for that, just have to spend time doing it. Add some more detail to these tanks. And then advent mills. Still have to buy some more kit parts to finish out the tops of those. Add windows. I like this color a lot better. Alright, sorry for that weird pause. Had to take a phone call from the wife in the middle of the video. So, important things first, right? Anyway, moving down to the Wichita yard. Still have to finish out these engine facilities. I just have the concrete in place for now. Obviously, track ballast and weathering. Cargill, I need to get a couple more grain bins to kind of fill that corner to the way I like. I'll add some piping and conveyors between the grain elevator and the bins just to tie all that together. And still have to add that last piece of track, actually both of these, and that one just looks like it's done. And get power to those. The main grain elevator itself, I still need to come back and true up all of these pieces of pipe. They're not all perfectly the same. I thought I was able to cut it by hand as close as I needed, but there's about a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch variance between all those, so I need to build a jig for my chop saw so they're all perfect. And then I can put a roof on the top, which you can see there is not. Add a roof to the top of the elevator itself, and probably some piping, a transfer house on top, things like that. And of course paint. So a lot of work just for that elevator. And track weathering and ballast for the yard itself. We'll move back over to the other side here. More of the same on the other side. This transition area, I have an idea for what I want to do for a backdrop. There's a large office building that I work at, without being too descriptive, that I'd like to put, because it actually is in that transition between the Wichita yard and Towanda, although the actual mileage between the two cities is about 20 miles, so that will stand in to kind of just change the mind from what we're looking at from a big yard to a rural setting. And maybe change that over to some oil field, because there is some oil field on both sides of Towanda, and some farm fields. So I was thinking about putting a farm field in that corner, maybe on both sides of the tracks, just because I wanted to try that. A lot of wheat and corn grown in Kansas, among other things. And Towanda itself, need to add a couple more houses, build a street, build a crossing, trees, so on. And then you have the El Dorado oil field here. Going to add one more of these Walthers pump jacks that will actually operate, but I think the 4 that I have, that will have total, I already have the kit for that one, will be enough for this scene. I have an oil field road and a gravel road here, which I'm going to call Shumway, which is an actual road between El Dorado and Towanda, which runs north-south across the tracks. And there's actually a tank battery right next to it, so that works out pretty well. And then we'll transition over into El Dorado Industrial Park, where we've got mirrors. Probably will add another structure similar to that in the background there. More details to that structure. And then this transition point for the trees for closer into El Dorado, where you have BG Products and Barcel Chemicals right next to each other. I'm going to do some more of these tanks in the background, and probably the foreground as well. Add some piping that ties them all together, and maybe a structure flat on the other side of those between the backdrop and the tanks themselves. And we transition to the El Dorado refinery. I had to take these berms down in order to install all this backdrop, and I didn't want to go to the trouble to reinstall them temporarily, because I'm going to have to tear it all down again to paint. And then obviously lots of work to do left for the El Dorado refinery. I envision, and I have the kits, I believe, and envision filling this entire concrete pad with structures. So be pretty impressive, I think, once it's done. And then you have that transition point in front of the breaker panel to Union Tank Car. At least now with the backdrops in place, I can get those painted, and I know exactly what commercial backdrop I'm going to add here. In reality, so this location is north of El Dorado. Here's the Google Earth view. It's really shrouded by trees on all sides. There's no public access to take any photos here. All the roads that you see are private access only. So this is actually upside down. There we go. So to mirror that on the layout, I'm going to do a full tree backdrop, and I think either Train Junkies or someone else, I think Train Junkies does, where it's just a steady row of trees with sky on the top, and that's all that's going to be, because the prototype is kind of shrouded by trees. So that's what that's going to look like. So just a few more minor structures to add, maybe a couple of vertical tanks and track weathering and ballast to do for unit tank car. So that's the full tour, including the update about Holcomb. Now I'll open up the polling for this next 2 weeks. Anything you'd like to see worked on the layout, I'll include that in the comments below, all the different options, all the different locations. Just include what you'd like to see in the comments. And just want to say thanks everybody for their participation and their comments and their questions. Let's keep it going for the next 2 weeks. Polling will end Sunday this weekend at midnight U.S. Central Time, and then Monday afternoon I'll shoot an update video with the poll results and the work plan to carry those out. Everybody, thanks for watching. Have a good weekend.